So I think we'll make a start. And everyone lingers in the common room because of all the fantastic cakes and conversation going on, but I think we should kick off the final session. My name's Juliet Vickery. I work for the RSPB. I'm head of the International Research Section at the Society's Centre for Conservation Science, and it's a huge pleasure for me to chair the final session. I have to do three things. I'll say a little bit more about the RSPB, because we also cohabit this building, which is fantastic for us. I'm going to have the great fun task of giving the BES Student Poster Prize, and then I'm going to invite a fantastic panel up to share with us their thoughts about what they might do differently in the future, having come to this meeting. And I hope that some of you will think about that yourselves too and be prepared to share that if we have time at the end. So just quickly, the RSPB, we heard on Monday from Stuart Butchart, it's the largest conservation NGO within the Birdlife partnership. We have about 1.5 million members, 2,000 staff, and amongst those staff are roughly 60 full-time scientists and about the same number of people working in policy. And as we heard from Malcolm Orsden on Tuesday, we own, manage or lease about 160,000 hectares of land in the UK, and we have two big projects internationally in Sierra Leone and Liberia and in Sumatra. In the context of this meeting, I think the RSPB seeks to bridge that gap between science and policy, or making science count, if you like, in three ways. Directly, we use our own evidence and the evidence from others to underpin the conservation management of our reserves. We seek to influence and inform government and government policies. And we also seek to try and influence individual behaviour towards more sustainable living, if you like. And those three strands are all part of our mission to seek a world richer in nature. And many of us have been at this conference and I think learned a great deal about how to do that job better. We sit in this building with many other conservation NGOs. It's been fantastic for us. I think you can feel some of the buzz of being part of the Cambridge Conservation Initiative. Okay, that's enough about the RSPB. The next job is a really nice job because I get to present the prizes for the student posters. We had a great collection of posters. I think there were 22 that were eligible for the student prize. Three of us loitered around trying not to look too suspicious in our judging. Myself, Pete Brotherton and Stuart Butchart. So we scored them and chatted to the students. And in the end, we came down to two that were really, really close. And we're going to award not a winner and a runner-up, but two joint winners. And I'll say what we're looking for. Strong science, really nice science, clear hypothesis, clear take-home messages, but obviously presented in a very eye-catching, attention-grabbing way that was clearly clear and easy to follow. And the two that we thought did that, many did it very well. The two that did it best of all. The first one was, I'm going to say, Siobhan Porter, working with the BTO. So this one asks a very clear question, which is that there's a moratorium on hedgerow cutting in the UK in the summer when birds are breeding. That moratorium, if you like, interferes with traditional farming management. And of course, there's a kind of call amongst farmers and landowners about why this is really important. This work modelled nest record card data from the BTO, and the final figure on the right-hand side shows that actually the breeding period of most of these species is beautifully captured by that moratorium on hedgerow cutting, and we should indeed keep that policy in place. Nicely presented, nice bit of science, clear policy implications after it, and a clear take-home message. I want to say the other winner, and then I'll invite them both to come up onto the stage to receive their prize. The second winner is Danielle Rabbiotti from the Institute of Zoology. Again, a visually very attractive poster, some really nice use of graphics, a very eye-catching. This basically started from two observations, that the distribution of wild dogs will be subject to climate change, to a warming, and that pup mortality increases as the climate warms. And the assumption has been that they could adapt to that because they could change their hunting behavior. But what this work showed was that hunting behavior is limited by the levels of moonlight. And so a change in that kind of behavior is just not possible, and they won't be able to adapt to climate change. I've tried to summarize them very quickly. I hope I've done justice to the science behind those two posters. And I'd like to invite Daniela and Siobhan up onto the stage if they're still both here. They both receive very kindly from Cambridge University Press a book of their choice. I think today it's a catalogue which they choose the book of their choice, and £50 prize from DICE. So with those two students, I'm really hoping they're still here, I'd like to come up and collect their prizes, and maybe CUP could come up on stage. You can see this is Daniela. I think Siobhan's not here. Someone from the BTO here who she worked with that perhaps could come up in her place. James, would you like to do that? I know you're a bit too old for your student now, but you can come and collect the prize. Thank you very much. So well done to both of those.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Great. Congratulations. So just while I introduce the next session, I'd like to invite the panelists to come up and take their places and get wired up so that we minimize kerfuffle time. So we started the conference with a really great question and answer session from a very great panel, and we have a similar way to end it. The conference, of course, has been entitled Making a Difference in Conservation, and the question posed to these panelists has been to reflect on the last few days and give us really 2 minutes on what they might take away with them now, what they might do differently as a result of having been here. I'm going to ask each panelist to introduce themselves in turn and to give you their sort of 2-minute synopsis, which is quite a challenge. I'd also like to ask you in the audience, whilst you're hearing this discussion, to think as well yourselves. If there's 1 or 2 things that you might take home from this conference that you could then do differently, put into practice in the work that you do, I'm really hoping we'll have time to share that at the end of this discussion. So I'm going to hand over, perhaps we'll move, I don't know which way around. So Rosie's name has been mentioned every time badgers has been mentioned at this conference, which is quite a lot. So maybe, Rosie, you'd like to start for us.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, I noticed there's been eight talks which mention badgers. That issue's come up repeatedly today, and it's because it's a topic, I think it's because it's a topic where there's a strong body of scientific evidence, which has nevertheless played only a really small role in current policy. And because I've worked on this for nearly 20 years, and probably because I'm a woman, and worse than that, I'm a mother, I have this abiding concern that this is all my fault. So my main hope for this conference, when I came here, what I really wanted to do was to learn from everybody here, what could I have done better, what could I do better in the future so that doesn't happen again. Nevertheless, I was a bit dismayed that on the first day of the conference, DEFRA's chief scientist blamed the controversy about TB on scientists, i.e. me. So I think one thing I've taken away is it is indeed all my fault. So thanks, Ian. I think this has been a really fascinating conference. I think 2 things really stand out for me. One is that the relationship between science and policy is necessarily asymmetric, because scientists don't make policy decisions, so policymakers have all the power. It's a buyer's market. And I think the second thing that's really stood out for me is the important role of values in policy making. This is something that some numbers of people have come up with in the course of it. And this is why, in the world that I live in, why the farming minister can look you in the eye, look right into the camera and say, badger culling is the right thing to do, despite the fact that all the evidence says that it's unlikely to control cattle TB. And our scientists get really uncomfortable talking about values because science itself has no values. In fact, to some scientists, the worst insult that you can level at them is that they've drifted from science into advocacy. That's like a really bad insult. I hear it a lot. What I think is we should be advocates, actually, but we should be advocates for science. And I've heard it stated a lot by a certain kind of person that works on this science policy interfaces, that we as scientists should, essentially, to paraphrase, we should know our place, we should say our piece, we should present the evidence, and then we should shut up and let other people, the wiser heads, make the decision. What I wonder is, could you imagine an economist saying that to other economists? Well, you should just, economists only just a little bit, just say your piece and then be quiet. So what am I going to do? I'm going to reflect a lot on all the amazing, brilliant ideas I've heard over the last few days, but I am going to continue to engage, and I'm going to continue to stand up for science in that arena.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Pete Brotherton.
Hi, I'm Pete Brotherton. I'm Director of Specialists and Science Programmes at Natural England. I think most of you know Natural England. We give away £1 million of public money every day to farmers, mainly, to farm in a more environmentally friendly way. We designate protected areas, and we have a responsibility for improving rights of way to the countryside, access to the countryside. What am I going to take away? Well, two things have struck me. Firstly, quite a lot of talk of the need for sort of honest brokers between science and policymakers. I think Susan Owen called it, what did she call it? Anyway, it was honest brokers to make that relationship work better. We kind of think that's what we do, and I think that's what DEFRA thinks we do for conservation in England. But what's been really clear to me is that's not what you think we do. And I think that there's something there that I need to try and fix, that we need to try and fix. And I'd be really interested in bodies in this room or people in this room who'd like to work with us to try and make that work better. So how can we better learn from your science and take your science into the environment, into the meetings with ministers that I and others attend? They do try to trust us. We won't be able to always represent it quite as well as you would, but we'll do our best. So how do we do that better? That was the first thing. Secondly, even though we don't perhaps have as good a relationship with the academic community or all the academic communities we'd like to, I think it's pretty good. However, what we heard a lot about today is that evidence isn't just the domain of academics. There's an awful lot of other evidence out there. I suspect a lot of us in this room are really comfortable with the idea that, or very positive about the idea that people should be engaging with indigenous communities in other countries. We recognize indigenous people in Panama as experts. But I wonder if we're as positive about the tens of thousands of farmers in our own country as experts, and whether we recognize that level of the knowledge that those landowners have. And I think actually that's a really important thing for us, to capture our own practitioner knowledge a lot better. And I've now got the contacts of EJ and Pernilla and Juliet, and I know how to find them, and I'll track them down. And I'm very interested again in others in this room who'd like to work with us to better capture practitioner evidence and build that into our decisions.
Great, thank you very much. Jonathan.
Okay, I'm Jonathan Spencer. I work as the Head of Planning and Environment for Forest Enterprise in England. That means that we deal with 258,000 hectares of land. And if you pull it all together, because it's spread all over the country, that's the size of Oxfordshire. And for our visitors from abroad, that's a fairly big county in England. So the first thing I'd like to say is it's impossible to sum up what I've learnt and what I'll do in 2 minutes. It's not only impossible and unfair, but for somebody like myself, it's a cruel and unusual punishment. So a few snippets of things that really hit home to me so that you get some idea of how all of the speakers and all of the conversations I've had have made an impact, which means that attending conferences like this do make a difference to people like myself who are out there with lots of people managing lots of land. A few snippets. They were all those papers, all those conversations, they've all gone into the intellectual toolbox that we'll start making use of. But over the last few days, I've been exhorted to be organisationally literate, to be not saying anything as a civil servant. I thought that was interesting, very difficult for me. Be cautious of crowds unless you want your boat named Boaty McBoatface. That was a really interesting lesson that nobody really picked up on, that the crowd is not necessarily the same as democracy. The crowd can be a mob, and the mob can determine all sorts of unwanted outcomes. But much more encouragingly, we heard from the University of Sussex that we should have faith in science and its relationship with democracy. I really liked that very much. I've also been told that when I retire, I should become an MP, I should engage with the media and ignore it at my peril, and I should drive a stake through the heart of irrationality. I thought all of that stuff was fantastic. Okay, so the big messages I picked up were a couple-fold, I'm not sure how many, I haven't counted them up here. We need to establish a monitoring, Malcolm made this very clear, we need to establish a monitoring programme, matrix, and that we should put something like 8 to 11% of our budget into it. We get £20 million a year to fund the non-market benefits on the estate, and fundamentally that's about biodiversity conservation, free public access, community woodlands and that sort of thing. we get £20 million. That would be £2 million to spend on ecological monitoring and social monitoring. That's not going to happen. I know I'm not going to, but I'll have a crack at it and see if I can get at least £500,000 aimed at the monitoring. So that's one thing I'll do as a result of the information I've picked up here. EJ and many others, lots of speakers, made it very clear that we need to engage much, much more fully with the social programme if we want to have a big impact. Forest Enterprise and Forest Services, we're quite different creatures. We both represented in the conference this week. We both think it's really important to pursue these systematic assessments of issues and get those systematic assessments and what they imply out to the staff. Because the staff do not have time to read all the science. They do not have time, really, to do anything than trust people like ourselves and deliver the goods. And we're going to do it via some fantastic infographics. The best workshop I've been to for many, many years was all about infographics. So really up for that, if only I could handle the computer. That was excellent. And lastly, there's some things which we will implement. We will crack on with this. We need to adopt a horizon scanning type approach that has more than just foresters and Forestry Commission staff involved with it, to look at the establishment of forest resilience. That's a real challenge for us. The things we do now in forestry, whether it's encouraging natural regeneration, planting trees, creating habitat, have to put up with the changes and impacts for the next 50 years. That's really important that we start using the skills and the expertise and the methods I've learned about this week to start establishing a program of forest resilience that has itself got some inbuilt resilience. The other thing which I really want to do, because it's our biggest dirty secret, as my CEO put it, is use citizen science to find out what we've got on the estate. An estate the size of Oxfordshire, with only a few hundred people managing it, cannot keep on top of all the comings and goings of all the species. Paul Dolman, who hasn't been here this week, from UEA, and we've made a bet with ourselves that if we look closely at the estate, we will have something like 80% of all the scheduled species, Schedule 41 species, which is basically a list of interesting, rare species, on the estate somewhere. 80%. That's such a powerful political figure, but we don't know what we've got. But that's after the day job is finished, and the day job, the moment I get back, is about the dog and ferret allowance, the licensing for species, and the continuing maintenance of forest certification. And it's a really important point to bear in mind that regardless of the excitement that we picked up today, most people's day jobs occupy 110% of their energy and their time, and they're not preoccupied with changing things. They're preoccupied with staying afloat. So it's an excellent trip, excellent weekend, and lots of impact as a result of the contribution you've all made.
Thank you very much. Victoria.
Thank you. I've come into this conference as much as a policy fellow at the Cambridge Science Centre for Science and Policy, as well as sort of working in the Treasury, and in thinking in my role as policymaker, what sort of work is going on, and hearing about certainly that an area I think it's really exciting how much evidence actually you have and how much people are using and thinking about how we better exploit evidence, because actually experiences in some of the policy areas we've been working on which are unrelated, you don't necessarily have the evidence, or you're set off with a policy challenge, and then it's actually what evidence is there both to support how you think about options to implement that policy. So it's not just the generation of the policy itself and the policy idea, it's then what's the most sensible options to implement it. And so that's what I found really valuable about some of, actually most of the sessions here and the workshops I've attended. And in any event, Treasury obviously really cares about how money is effectively allocated and making sure it's actually spent wisely. And then you have actually organisations that will come, several years after and check and challenge, departments about, you took this policy decision, you took these options. Was this actually, what sort of evidence went behind the decisions you took? And it will be interrogated, whether it's by the National Audit Office or the Public Accounts Committee. And Treasury has an Office of Accounts that has to sit in all of these hearings and comment. So we do really care about this. So what's really valuable, I think, and the fact that it's starting to be much more developed systematically from what's being talked about in this conference, and where there's been lots of reference about health and how systematic reviews and what works has really been developed over the last 10 years, is actively used, and there's lots of open access to the information in health, and that it's now being done much more systematically on conservation. I mean, I can, definitely can go back, and then you can ask, well, the more you know about what's being done, and there's an evidence base built up, and you can look at the what works site and evidence for conservation, you can then ask, how's this information being used in proposals that are being put forward for funding, and therefore get it much more in the sort of bread and butter about policy officials thinking about, well, there's this information out there, and how am I using it? And I've put also the question back, the point back here in the conference is, what's really helpful is some points being made about how you summarise that evidence to make it digestible and understandable to someone who might not be expert, but also then something that chimes with the relevance about how they can then actually deliver this as something that will chime with the public and their constituents, because that's ultimately also what the Minister's really interested in, I find, about how then they can deliver something that the public will want. So again, totally separately, one of the things we found in relation to the budget is actually infographics, and some of these sort of the really things that get the public excited is not what you think. So a couple of times ago, we'd monitored the number of hits on budget announcements, and the biggest one was actually people being able to get their tax discs for their cars online. And there'd been an infographic with that, and that really chimed. So how you can convey some of the sort of key findings in a way that really grabs attention is important in a time and resource constrained world. Officials have to put advice in, which is the other thing that we're trying to work within. I think that's the main things to look at. But also, I wanted to also took away the real value of coming along to these sort of conferences to hear what's going on, because in the day job, there's not enough time to devote to looking at what's out there. But this sort of event where you've got policymakers and scientists coming together and thinking about how they communicate together is really important.
Thank you very much. Kathryn.
Yes, thank you. So I'm Kathryn Monk. I'm the Principal Advisor for Science for Natural Resources Wales, which is a Welsh government arm's length body, and it's included environment, conservation and forestry. So it's a really very sort of ecologically directed organisation now. I've also been a member of the British Ecological Society for an unmentionable number of years. In fact, it was only when I came here to my first symposium for quite a long time that I realised just how many years it's been. To put in context what I'm going to say, I started as an academic. I did my postdoc with the Ministry of Agriculture in those days. Went on to work overseas, increasingly in conservation and development, via very scientific expeditions. And then I came home and went into the British government system in their agencies, and so have moved from seeing the ground level work that we've discussed here of getting results literally sort of within a village level and a region level and very evolving situations overseas, through to seeing how and helping to get policy developed with good evidence. Overseas it was very difficult. If you have an area the size of Wales and there's only 300 people really looking after that, directed in, for example, as I did, the EC funded programme, you have to work very pragmatically, and it was very good to hear a lot of pragmatism come through over the past 3 days. But sort of drawing it back to the British Ecological Society, I think for me, for my comments and what I found, it has in effect encapsulated my whole career. So the good thing is that I didn't actually hear anything that I didn't recognise, because if I did, then that was going to be quite a disaster. What it does do is there's 3 things I wanted to sort of flag, and one was, I'll use the word literacy in a general phrase: literacy, legitimacy and leadership. And being able to say that at the end of 3 days of a British Ecological Society Symposium, I think is quite good. So the literacy side has been a fantastic opportunity to see a whole new generation come in, to recognise and get a lot of this information, a lot of these questions and challenges to take on in the round. You've seen it in a very comprehensive context, whereas for certainly for people like myself, you know, we've put together a lot of this through experience, bitter and otherwise. And it hasn't been something which has been really developed in societies like this before. And indeed, when I was an undergraduate in the British Ecological Society, when there was a discussion about whether the BES should be influencing policy, at that time it was said very clearly that we put science on the table. That was it. We put the science on the table. So it's great to really realise how far we've come. So it's the literacy of a new generation, and this is going to be something, I think, which is going to be super to follow up. The legitimacy is that it is becoming a legitimate subject. That has a bit of danger, because I did hear a lot of people refer to it as a research field developing, and we don't want to sort of give ammunition to people that say academics always just want to do research. So whilst we want to do research on science into policy, let's keep that separate to the real practical advice that I think you're primarily driving forward. And the third one is leadership, and goes back to the position of the British Ecological Society, where we started on the first day. Gemma Harper asked how many social scientists were here, and a few put their hands up. And that isn't unexpected, because this is a British Ecological Society. It has been very zoological and botanically based for many years. However, the number of cross-trans-disciplinary discussions I'm hearing does mean that we are encouraging and supporting a much broader base of students and postgraduates to come into the society. So I think the society is really to be congratulated at this very comprehensive summary in the symposium, and I really look forward to seeing some clear, comprehensive outputs that we can use and people can refer to, and avoid starting every new challenge on first principles. So that's me.
Thank you very much. And finally, Andrew.
Thank you. Andrew Slade, Welsh Government. In my day job, I'm Director of Agriculture, Food and Marine, so we do strategic policy work as well as operational delivery in my bit of Welsh Government. And I'm also the head of policy profession for Welsh Government, which means that I am leading the capability programme for people who help make policy within Welsh Government. And on a good day, I'm one of those humble, open policy-making civil servants that you heard about earlier. And on a bad day, I'm one of those lousy gatekeepers to ministers. My background, or my academic career, ended in a degree in medieval history, which made me uniquely qualified to talk about conservation matters and agricultural policy, which is what I began working on in 1993, although I have found a knowledge of the workings of Byzantium useful along the way. I've only been here for today. I wasn't able to join the conference and got here last evening, but I have found today extremely helpful and informative, not just to be part of it, but also, as one of my former bosses used to put it, to help sharpen the saw, because you come in and you learn things, you get new ideas, and that's precisely one of the key aims from today. And I think the thing that comes out for me, because we're doing some interesting things in Wales, and Kathryn has touched on it a bit in terms of where Natural Resources Wales is going. We have 2 new pieces of primary legislation that have just come out and have received royal assent and indeed been enacted. One is a new Environment Act, which looks at natural resources systems, looks at circular economies, and also talks about a wider sense of engagement and strategic analysis of issues facing the natural environment, rather than going down more siloed lines. That's a very important piece of legislation on statute books in Wales. And the other is the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which my minister has coined as the sort of Common Sense Act, but it obliges public bodies in Wales to adopt the Sustainable Development Goals that you heard about there and work towards those goals. So if you're an economic development agency, not just to think about the economy, but to think about the wider circumstances and objectives of the Government of Wales, but also puts on us an obligation to work in one of 5, as I said, common sense ways around thinking for the longer term, collaborating, involving, integrating, and what's the other one? Oh yes, around prevention. So working in a much more preventative way to try and head off problems and to tackle opportunities. And what's come out of today for me has been how we do engagement and involvement in moving those objectives forward. That's not just about government engaging with the scientific community or stakeholders or those with an interest in what we're doing, which is very important, and we've heard about new techniques and new ways of doing those sorts of things, but also how we can use our convening power as government to help get those conversations going between different sets of stakeholders. Because very often, by the time the problem gets to us in government, in whatever form that might be, it's because there's been a breakdown of trust and relationships between different stakeholder groups or different interests. And I think we heard a lot today about how we might go about tackling those sorts of challenges in a different way and using different techniques. So those will be some of the things that I will be taking back to Welsh Government from today.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Maybe just, perhaps just a quick round of applause for a really insightful. That's also designed to give you a bit more thinking time. We've got about 10 minutes, so I need 5 minutes to do your thanks and wrapping up, so it's 5 minutes over to any of you for either your own reflections, or indeed if there are questions you'd like to ask of the panel of their own reflections, that would be great. So as usual, we've got the roving mic, so please go ahead. Ollie.
Thank you. I'm Ollie Watts. I work on policy for a more sustainable world for the RSPB. And one of the things that I've picked up is a number of social engagement techniques which would have made my life much less griefful, if that's a word, over the last 20 years trying to coerce the peat industry to become not a peat industry. But I think a lot there that will help me towards swifter resolution in the future and to smoother advocacy in the future. I think one of my key points, I never thought I'd come here and quote David Cameron, thank you Elizabeth, so I'll paraphrase him. We all want people to make better choices for nature. And I think that's for nature is the bit that is really missing. A taxi driver asked David Attenborough when he developed his love for nature, and his response reputedly was, "When did you lose yours?" And I think that's really telling. Ian Boyd outlined the sort of the triangulation of having science, politics, and deliverability as to how things actually get done. And I was a bit disappointed he didn't pick up on the science a bit more. And I think we really need to influence the politics through governments and through people, and to increase the natural environment in people's perception, in people's background, knowledge of things generally. So I think my take home is that, and this is a quote from one of the workshops I attended, we are all intermediaries in nature. I will try and be a better intermediary for nature, and I hope you all will too. Finally, I will rejoin my 30-year lapse membership of the BES and try and get a bit, I said it publicly now, and try and get a bit more involved in the policy development that's relevant to me with the BES. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Ollie. There's Amanda at the back, and if anyone else wanting to ask a question, wave your arms now and we'll get Ben, could you take a mic down there?
Yes, thank you. It was slightly tricky to add this trip to this meeting to my trip overseas, but gosh, I'm glad I did. It's been fantastic. I suppose my only complaint is I didn't get any emails done at the back here. Busy tweeting away. The first thing I think I got from this meeting was a sense of validation that I wasn't alone in my desire to bridge science and policy, because it can be very easy to feel quite isolated when you're based in academia and determined to affect change. So I love the fact this was a community of people trying to figure out how to get this right. And really enjoyed Gemma's comment that we've got to remember to make conservation, not science, the goal, which is very much the way I've been thinking about it for a long time. And of course, was thrilled with Huge Possum with his comments about let's get on with it. We really have to balance out data gathering and action. For those of you who don't know, Huge Possum is Hugh's Twitter account. The things I really learned were Susan Owen's comment that the Royal Commission on Environmental Pollution was successful because it tread a very delicate path between working with the department and fiercely demonstrating its independence, working with the department and then breaking away to make its own points. I found that very helpful, that you can jump back and forth as long as you're respectful in a way that can generate change. And I also really appreciated her comment that you have to be very persistent because the gaps between input and policy change can be 25 years, or I suppose even more. I valued Gemma Harper's comment that we have to become anthropologists in studying the culture, the practices, the symbols of the policy environment, which is a little bit what we heard from Mark in the last talk as well. I learned from Tris Allenson that Florence Nightingale was a great statistician and created amazing visualizations, and indeed was the first person to develop polar graphics. And that rather astonished me, but delighted me. The final comments that I'm taking away is Hugh Possingham's comment that the simple single solution to the science policy nexus is to turn up. And I wanted to add my own input that one of my great idols, Bob Johannes, who was a marine conservationist, marine ecologist, said that there is no such thing as perfect advice. Your choice is imperfect advice or none at all. And I think if we all hold on to that, we may feel a bit better about our less than perfect, but certainly heartfelt commitment to changing the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Great. I think we've got time, I'm looking at Bill, for one last comment, which is gentleman at the front.
It's Robb Benstead-Smith, FFI. I work on FFI's Latin America and Caribbean program, so I spend a lot of time trying to influence policy in one way or another in these countries. And I think one thing I strongly take away from here is a lot broader sense of all the different approaches complementary to that, building the relationship of trust with the person in government, that can be brought to bear in order to influence policy. So a lot more about how to, a lot of new ways of how to enable scientific evidence to inform and bound policy decisions in a developing country context. And I think the other takeaway is FFI works a lot through partners in different countries. That's our usual way of working. Partner organizations, and nearly always that means NGOs. But something I'm going to reflect on after this conference is how can we work more effectively with the academic community in these countries as opposed to seeing them principally as a source of information, of scientific input. Actually, they can have potentially a much wider role in those countries just as here, and sometimes they have a greater freedom to do so than NGOs, which are often very constrained. National NGOs are often very constrained by governments on what they can do.
Thank you very much. I've been told I can take two more. So two more comments people would like to share. Please wave your arms in the air. Ellie in the front and Ruth, perhaps you could take these. Is that all right? Sorry. Whoever.
Thank you. My name's Ellie Crane. I'm particularly interested in how evidence is used in policy making. This has been a really great 3 days for me. My action to take away, I'm a member of a political party and I'm helping them at the moment review their policies on nature conservation. So I'm really hoping we can use some of the structured decision-making tools I've learnt about to make sure that scientific evidence and the values of our members are both given appropriate amount of weighting in our policy making. And my second thing I'm going to take away after attending Julian's workshop yesterday afternoon is I'm going to go and see my MP and talk to her about conservation, because I've never actually met her.
Great, thank you very much. Ruth.
Hello, I'm Ruth Ritual from the James Hutton Institute in Aberdeen, but I'm also the chair of the Scottish Policy Group from the BES. And increasingly, I've always thought of myself as an applied scientist, but increasingly actually trying to make that link more with policy. And it's really amazing when you do see your science actually being taken up by policymakers, but as we all find, it's quite hard. And I think some of the things I've really learnt during this workshop have been unusual words that you wouldn't actually usually hear in a scientific conference, things like trust and values and relationships. And I think it's those words that I'm going to take back and really think about to try and actually make the time to get to know those policymakers that I'm interacting with, to try and gain their trust and to build a relationship with them so that we've got those relationships of trust and value. So those are my three key words: trust, values and relationships.
Thank you very much. Maybe that's a good point at which to end. There's 3 good words to end on, along with turn up and speak up, which I think we should all take away with us. I just want to say very quickly also that as well as being a member of staff at the RSPB, I'm chair of the BES Policy Committee. Very honoured to be that chair. We have a really strong team and a very strong committee, and we will very much look to build on what's come out of this meeting. I think particularly creating that space for experts in science and experts in policy to talk to each other, which has been so important, I think, here. So that's my take home. So I'm looking at the 2 members of the policy team, so we need to work on that. This has been a big joint effort. A lot of people have helped to organise, to sponsor and to fund it. The sponsors are largely on the board, particular thanks to the BES Conservation SIG and to Methods in Ecology and Evolution, who don't appear on that very largely on the slide. Thank you to them. Thank you to fantastic BES staff on the ground who've done so much organising, and to CCI obviously for hosting it in this building. Big thanks to our speakers, our panellists, and to you in the audience for some great interaction and great questions. Thank you for being so much part of that and engaging all those really lively conversations that happened around posters, around tea and coffee and lunch. That's been great. Those of you who went to the workshop run on the Delphi technique that Mark Bergen ran with Bill will have learnt about this, the white man syndrome, where the older middle-aged white man thinks he's indestructible. I think it's quite a good job that Bill felt that way in organising this conference for some of these times. He did a fantastic job on steering the course for us. And yes, it's been a group effort, but we had a really great leader. So thank you also to Bill. And finally, okay. And finally, just 2 kind of adverts, please. I mean, one is to say you had a questionnaire which came in your conference programme. Please do fill it in. We always look to make these things better for all of us. And on the back to the advert, if you thought this was a great meeting, the annual meeting in Liverpool, I hesitate to say maybe even better, I'm not sure, but it'll be great too. So do sign up for that if you've been enthused by things you've heard here. And finally, I think I just want to say, this conference was entitled Making a Difference in Conservation. I really hope that you've learned of some new tools, met some new people and new connections here, and gone away with inspiration to do exactly that. So go and make a difference in conservation. Thank you very much.